On 4 March, under threat of assassination, Abraham Lincoln was sworn in as President of the United States. One of Lincoln's first acts was to order innocents to hold the fort. As March began, anti-secessionists in the South vainly pleaded their case. In Virginia, an editorial in the Christian Banner went so far as to question the validity of Jefferson Davis's presidency. Who elected Davis? Was a popular vote of the 6 seceding states taken? Look at it. And now we are urged to fly for refuge to this newly created Confederacy of 6 states, without having any voice in our representation, either in Congress or us as president. Thank God all free men are not sold yet. Swanberg, 1957. In Mississippi, the current advisor warned of military defeat should war break out and accused the new government of having so exasperated the already burdened taxpayers as to require a leader to induce them to resist the collection of the tax. An editorial in the Charleston Mercury urged the population of the city, keep cool and bide your time. The honor of this state is no further involved in this matter. It has been transferred to the shoulders of the government of the Confederate States of America, whether wisely or not. It's too late to discuss. War 6 weeks ago might have placed Virginia now by our side. War would have been the name of the state of South Carolina. The glory, prestige, and historical fame would have been hers. It is no longer so. The blood will be hers. A little of the profit. Swanberg, 1957. Both favoring secession used Lincoln's inaugural address in their argument and proclaimed the decision to withdraw from the Union irreversible. In the address, Lincoln warned, no state upon its own mere notion can lawfully get out of the Union. The power confided in me will be used to hold, occupy, and possess the property of places belonging to the government. A Tennessee newspaper claims that no man can read the inaugural without coming to the conclusion that it is a declaration of war against the seceding states. In no less than 30 days, if the balls are carried out, we shall have the clangor of resounding arms with all the concomitants of death, carnage, and woe. The Charleston Courier, for its part, was through debating the issue, let the argument proceed to the next logical and necessary steps. Appeal to arms. We are ready. Newspapers sold like never before, and the opportunity to capitalize on the crisis was not lost on merchants whose advertisements appeared as mock news stories about Sumter. This advertisement appeared in the Providence Journal in early March 1861. Fort Sumter not taken. Easiest Cunningham's Emporium. Furniture, feathers, cotton, oilcloth, crockery, and china. 108, 110, and 112 Broad Street. Lincoln and Davis were lampooned to such a degree in their own nation's newspapers that often they were treated only slightly worse in opposition editorials. Lincoln was his only features, was an easy target, and routinely got the worst of it. England followed the newspaper accounts of the collapse of the United States intently. War, after all, could bring her an opportunity to reestablish herself as a power in North America. Great Britain, the greatest naval power in the world, might do for the Confederacy what the Confederacy could not do for itself, provide safe trading passages with Europe and the rest of the world. Of course, there were dangers in such alliances, former foes, particularly former fledgling Confederate states, but mere recognition of the Confederacy as a sovereign nation by Britain or France might cripple the North's attempt to punch the South. The state of Virginia was caught in a dilemma. Virginia was large, wealthy, and powerful, but divided on the issue of secession. The home of many of the founding fathers and the site of many of the first colonial settlements, Virginia had a proud heritage, although the lifestyle in Virginia was decidedly southern, with slavery and the plantation economy well established. Its geographical position spawned many loyalties to the North. The possibility of Virginia becoming a battleground should it secede was not overlooked by its populace. The Confederacy was no military match for the United States. The eventual outcome of any conflict seemed obvious, but Virginians take part in the pummeling of their southern neighbors. If Virginia succeeded, on the other hand, by taking her industry, glacier and ports, not only would the balance of power be dramatically tipped, the Potomac River would be all that stood between the Confederate States of America and the White House. Virginia's importance was extolled by one of her congressmen, the bellicose Roger Pryor, who used the streets of Charleston as a stage from which he entertained the locals with promises of his native Southern allegiance. Pryor urged the commencement of hostilities, contending that Virginia was only waiting for the seceded states to take the fateful step. A commitment to independence can only be demonstrated through violence, Pryor urged. You want Virginia to join you? You must strike a blow. Lincoln and Anderson were both facing problems. Several members of Lincoln's cabinet urged the president to surrender the fort in order to preserve the loyalty of Virginia and other border states. Lincoln saw such an act as recognition of the Confederate states and wouldn't hear of it. Agents accepted suspicious of his man, who couldn't comprehend his dilemma. Although privately he was in favor of evacuating the fort, he would play his orders to hold Sumter while at the same time attempting to maintain a delicate peace. Aitchison instructed his men, who were weary and subsisted mainly on potatoes, to bring only the guns that were protected by casemates. The biggest guns were on the top tier of the fort, while Anderson considered their positions to be too dangerous for his gunners. He also stressed to his gunners that if the fort came under attack, they must demonstrate their prowess by destroying Charleston's gun positions without inflicting civilian casualties. Despite their situation, the morale of Anderson's men was surprisingly high, and they were eager to get on with the fight. They expected to begin any day. As Anderson was preparing his men for a fight, so too was Lincoln. On 6 April, Lincoln dispatched a message to the governor of South Carolina. I am directed by the President of the United States to notify you to expect an attempt to be made to supply Fort Sumter with provisions only. If such attempt be not resisted, no effort to throw in men, arms, or ammunition will be made without further notice or in case of an attack upon the fort. Swanberg, 1957. As desperate as the situation seemed, Lincoln had shrewdly created the scenario he had hoped for. You could have no conflict without being yourself the aggressor, he had promised the South. As the plight of Sumter's men was played up in the newspapers throughout the North, Lincoln needed to have worried about raising the troops he would need to wage war. At 4:30 a.m. on 12 April 1861, Roger Pryor was offered the honor of firing the first shot at Fort Sumter, but Pryor couldn't bring himself to do the work that for weeks he had been urging others to do. The honor instead went to an elderly secessionist, Edward Ruffin. One of his first rounds fired at the fort smashed into its 5-foot-thick walls, only a few feet from where Doubleday was sleeping. As Anderson had given his men strict orders to remain in their quarters until reveille, Doubleday contemptuously ignored the blast. To many observers, the early spring morning resembled a 4th of July celebration, as batteries from several points along the shoreline poured shot and shell into a small target in the harbor center. One shell burst over the fort, creating an image of the palmetto tree, symbol of South Carolina, against the dark sky. For the next 2 hours, Sumter was sit mute and defenseless. As the sun emerged, the fire intensified. Amid the din of steady bombardment, reveille was sounded at 6 a.m. With remarkable cool, the men breakfasted on the last rations of meat which Anderson had saved for such a moment, in water. Beauregard's batteries continued to hammer the silent fort. Spectators lining the shore and rooftops of the city were beginning to wonder if Sumter would put up a fight at all. Rumors spoke of Sumter's imminent surrender and a failed mutiny by Doubleday. Word of Anderson's resignation spread throughout Charleston. Beauregard knew Anderson too well not to expect a fight, and a good one. At 7:30 a.m., any lingering doubts about their commander evaporated when the men of Sumter were ordered to their posts. Their feelings of anxiety and helplessness were swept away by a rush of excitement. As if to make a point, Anderson asked Doubleday if he would accept the honor of firing his first shot in defense of the United States. Fort Sumter rumbled and his first shot screeched across the harbor. Many in the crowd in Charleston cheered. The American Civil War had begun. Both teacher and prize people were at their best, and the artillery demonstration continued throughout the morning and afternoon. Anderson's men destroyed several Confederate batteries, but Beauregard's guns began reducing Fort Sumter to rubble, setting it ablaze. Within the fort, men were as busy fighting fires as they were working their guns. A fire burned near the fort's main magazine where dozens of barrels of powder were stored. Disobeying orders, one of Anderson's men manned one of the bigger guns on the exposed parapet. There was no sign of the U.S. Navy. At one point, Sumter's flagpole was shot away, and Beauregard sent a delegation to the fort under a flag of truce to accept a surrender. Anderson explained that there had been a misunderstanding, and the Stars and Stripes would promptly run up another pole. Unsatisfied, the Southerners departed, and the battle resumed. All of Sumter's gunners carefully selected their targets. Doubleday settled a personal grievance by sending a ball through the roof of the Charleston Hotel Moultrie House. There were no injuries. Anderson's men fought through 3 shifts. The supply of enthusiasm, however, exceeded that of their powder. By dusk, Sumter had fallen silent. Beauregard's firing had become sporadic, but throughout the night the batteries continued to punish the burning target in the harbor. At dawn, the crowds on the shore could still see Anderson's flag flying through thick black smoke, billowing from the fort. The Confederate gunners had hoped to see a white flag. Take a break. I'm getting tongue-tied. 1/5 of the fort was on fire, and the wind drove the smoke in dense masses into the angle where we had all taken refuge. It seemed impossible to escape suffocation. Some lay down close to the ground with handkerchiefs over their mouths, and others posted themselves near the embrasures, where smoke was somewhat lessened by the draft of air. Had not a slight change of wind taken place, the result might have been fatal to most of us. Our firing having ceased, and the enemy being very jubilant, I thought it might be well to show them that we were all not dead yet, and ordered the gunners to fire a few rounds more. The scene at the time was really terrific. The roaring and crackling of flames, the mass of boiling smoke, the bursting of the enemy shells, and our own which were exploding in the burning rooms. The crashing of the shot and the sounds of masonry falling in every direction made the fort a pandemonium. Swanberg, 1957. Fort Sumter had been struck more than 3,000 times. Still, within the fort there was no panic. By noon, however, Sumter was spent only making token responses to the onslaught that had fallen into silence. With every shot fired by the men of Sumter, the crowds in Charleston let out a cheer as they watched the fort struggle for life. There was no honor in battering a defenseless adversary, and one man could no longer stand the mismatch. Without authorization, former Texas Senator and ardent secessionist Louis Wigfall rode out to the fort under the cover of smoke and entered carrying a white flag. Wigfall found Anderson exhausted, covered with dirt and soot, but with pride intact. "Let us quit this," Wigfall pleaded. In surrendering the fort, Anderson sought 2 conditions: the safe passage of his men out of Charleston and the honor of taking down the flag of the United States. Both sides were astonished to learn that neither side had suffered a single serious casualty. Anderson complimented some of Beauregard's gunners on their work. There were some hot feelings regarding Doubleday's firing on the Moultrie House, yet an explanation was demanded. Doubleday took responsibility for the incident. His reasoning was deemed acceptable, and the matter was dropped. Newspapers began arriving at the fort, and by Sunday afternoon the harbor was filled with sightseeing boats. A reporter from the Providence Journal telegraphed, "All the officers and the men look hearty, appear to be well fed, and to have plenty of provisions." Anderson said he expected help from the Carolinas in putting out his fire. This, he said, was nothing more than usual in civilized warfare. He was likewise surprised that there was no evidence of bloodshed. Best evidence of skill, 1861 to 1865. On Sunday, 14th April, at 1:30 in the afternoon, Anderson and his men gathered at the center of Fort Sumter to lower their flag. A ship bound for New York waited for them at Sumter's dock. As they slowly lowered the flag, Sumter's gunners fired a 50-gun salute. In the coolest of ironies, one of the guns exploded. One man, according to the Providence Journal, was tossed into the air and came down a mangled mass of humanity. Another man was taken to a hospital in Charleston, where he died a few hours later. With the fort's flag in his possession, Anderson boarded the vessel that would take him and his command safely out of Charleston Harbor. The men watched as the smoke and ruin in the harbor slowly faded into the distance. From Woodville to Warwick, news of the battle rocked America like no other single event in its young history. The fates of Frank Green and Sam and Apostolate were sealed, and throughout, both nations began to put their affairs in order.